Wall Street Journal, Scott Gottlieb. An aortic valve approved in Europe 4 years ago will soon be approved in the U.S. Meanwhile, thousands who may have benefited from the device have died. And the title of his piece is How the FDA Could Cost You Your Life. Now, I'm bringing this up not only because of the obvious reason that it is costing lives, but whenever we get into these debates about cutting government, why, you don't want your food and drugs regulated? And we sit there like we have a thumb up our nose, and we don't know how to respond to that, right? Never is it considered that these regulations are causing lives. Never is it considered that cafe standards kill people, which they do. Never is it considered that DDT saved people, and by outlawing it or regulating it in a way where it's not profitable, we're killing people. But it does when you regulate that way. So the Food and Drug Administration may be helping people, but it's also killing people. When people age, the main valve carrying blood out of the heart becomes brittle. As this aortic valve narrows, it can cause debilitating heart failure and even death. Fixing the problem in America requires open heart surgery. You haven't had it. It does get your attention, as it did in my case. In Europe, listen to this. The problem can be repaired using a tiny catheter that introduces a replacement valve through an artery in the leg. And that artery in the leg, ladies and gentlemen, is used to also clear out blocked arteries and to put in stents. But in America, they did not allow the procedure that had been approved in Europe, this tiny catheter through the artery in a leg. Instead, they had to crack your chest open and do major, and I mean major, surgery on you. In July, a Food and Drug Administration advisory panel said this device should also be approved for sale in the U.S. It's expected to reach patients by the end of this year, more than 4 years after it first hit the market in Europe. This is an all too familiar story. The FDA impeding useful innovations in the U.S. Entrepreneurs here are forced to test promising medical devices in costly animal studies for years before they can advance their products into clinical trials. When clinical studies get started, the FDA is asking for longer and larger trials that increasingly mirror hurdles proposed for new drugs. God knows how many life-saving devices and drugs are kept off the market because these bureaucrats are bureaucrats. In response, American device makers are moving their businesses overseas. Too bad they're not protesting this on the Brooklyn Bridge. Between 2004 and 2010, more than half of all innovative devices were first approved in Europe. Because more devices now launch in Europe, companies increasingly study the products there. In 2004, 87% of all medical device studies listed at clinicaltrials.gov were being carried out in the U.S. By 2009, only 45% of clinical trials were run here. Manufacturing's also moving overseas as a consequence. Many emerging market countries, including China, India, and Brazil. Here we have China, communist country. India is still pretty socialist, trying to move toward capitalism, and Brazil, a socialist country, have enacted country of origin rules. These laws require a marketed device to be made in the same country where it received regulatory approval. Companies know they'll get European approval long before they get the FDA's nod. So if they want to market their devices in these emerging markets, they need to make sure manufacturing facilities are also located in the European Union. We're losing the technology, we're losing jobs, we're losing the tax base, and we're losing lives. The Food and Drug Administration. Not surprisingly, U.S. investment in medical devices is falling. According to data from PricewaterhouseCoopers and the National Venture Capital Association, the number of newly started venture-backed medical device companies fell to 60 in 2010 from 118 in 2008. The magnitude of these declines dwarfs those seen in other entrepreneurial sectors. It cannot reasonably be ascribed to the struggling economy alone. Yet the FDA is demanding more drug-like trials for devices, causing many of the delays in getting new products to U.S. consumers. Europeans typically don't demand these kinds of studies. A 2011 study by the Boston Consulting Group of European Device Approvals suggests Europe's more expedited process is just as rigorous and safe as the FDA's. And it goes on, and we will link to this article. You'll find it on my website after the program, marklevinshow.com. And with that said, the government's going to take over more and more and more of the health care and medical business in this country. And people are protesting that they do it. And they don't even understand the consequences. As I've said many times, why is it nobler to paraphrase the great late Dr. Milton Friedman? Why is it nobler when politicians and bureaucrats make decisions rather than individuals in the private sector? And why is it said that the government is efficient and compassionate when all the evidence suggests otherwise? Look at the bureaucracy. Is this compassionate? Is this efficient? Few people would say there shouldn't be some regulating of food and drugs. And yet the problem is stopping them from going rogue, which is what they're constantly doing. Anytime you want to cut budgets, it's, what do you want to do? Cut, this research or that research. It is always assumed that whatever the government is doing is good and right and proper, when in fact we know that's not the case. The Food and Drug Administration is costing lives. Is it saving some lives? Yes. But it's also costing lives. What will Obama do about it? Nothing at all.